Let me ask you a question. Let me just ask you a generic overview question. We talk about the last 15 years, probably. The concept de nos jours, the concept of our generation has been resilience. Resilience has been the thing. And I'm sure, Richard, that you've written multiple papers around resilience and everybody wants resilience. It doesn't feel that we're getting resilient. I mean, if the opposite of resilience is fragility and brittleness, generally speaking, are the in urban environments that we are all living in, are the cities that we're living in 2024, moving, let's say, to 2030, are they resilient and are they getting more resilient? Or actually, are they brittle and fragile? And are they genuinely only one slight, small accident away from total damn collapse? Richard, let's come to you. So as you see, here we don't go for the flowers and chocolates and dinner. We just go straight for the stuff, straight for the interesting stuff. No easy questions. Are we on the edge of a potential global collapse somewhere in the world? Richard, do you want to come in on that?
Sorry, me coming in on that. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great big exam question there, David. And I think, as you say, my work is very much involved, looking at how the macro level risk landscape is evolving, and indeed how companies and governments can better respond to that in the form of strategic, resilience and in terms of crisis management. I think where we are on this at the moment is that we have a risk landscape that has changed rapidly and actually is showing quite a lot of inflection points at the moment in terms of big, seismic shifts in terms of international relations, in terms of societal discontent, in terms of some of the big technological changes, and indeed potentially in terms of climate change as well. Again, obviously last year was a record year for air temperature and ocean temperature and other factors, and the debate has begun to move on to actually, are we approaching certain tipping points in certain planetary systems, be that the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, some of the North Atlantic currents, etc., and what are the consequences of that? So I think that sense of accelerating change is, across all these different axes, which is leading to new crisis or new potential crisis situations, does raise that big question as to whether the structures and the processes and the general arrangements that cities have at the moment are indeed adequate for the future. And I think it's not just about their planning and capabilities and arrangements like that. It's also about the capacity of communities within those cities to absorb these new potential shocks as well.
It's interesting to absorb, because that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the classic definition of resilience, it is to absorb, adapt, and recover. I mean, that's the classic engineering thing. And what everybody forgets is the last bit. It's absorb, adapt, recover, and learn. And everybody forgets the learning bit. Please.
Yeah, and I think there's one bit more beyond that. It's about actually being able to transform as well. And I think there is a bigger agenda than simply recover. It's about actually really beginning to reshape the resilience for the future, not just by addressing some of the problems that have been there, but also by engaging with some of the root causes, of that, and therefore actually building something new and different, not just build back better, but build back new as part of this.
There is absolutely this build forward, and recover forward, and actually resilience has really gone beyond this concept of recovery, hasn't it? It is something much more ergonomic and in terms of an ecosphere and being in tune with the environment we're operating in, rather than sort of just recovering to back what we were and having that survivability. Interesting subjects to explore and open up later. Peter, I met you originally in London. You were doing the Cape Town project, brilliant projects, and we'll share links with that. I mean, if you want us to, because that's the first time we met. What you said to me very early on is that actually Africa has Africa has a huge amount to teach people. There's a lot to learn from the way Africa deals with crisis, and that to a large extent that inherent knowledge and capability and genuine resilience has been ignored by academics and policymakers. What's your view? Do you think that we're missing and please feel free to riff off anything that Richard is asking. Are we missing a trick? Are we sort of thinking about resilient cities as being Geneva and Tokyo and Vancouver, and not, Nairobi and Joburg, and Lagos and Bangkok and Dhaka and all the others?
You do like to ask a lot of questions, don't you?
I do, because as I'm talking, I can think of more and more.
They stack up like a sort of leaning tower of Pisa.
No. I'm thinking. I'm showing actually great restraint. I stopped. I could have kept going, Peter. Really.
I know. I was
this is restraint.
very appreciative of the fact that you did stop there.
Good.
I think I'm going to. Do you mind? I'm just going to
take one. Take
one.
Go on.
And it may not even be something that you've asked, but that's
fine. That's perfect. Good stuff.
I'd like to talk about the Grand Prix. No, what I'm going to talk about is the importance of leadership in cities, because the normal way to talk about resilience and urban anything is to talk in systems, infrastructure, fiscal stuff, all of which is important. But my particular interest and angle over 25, 30 years has been in helping leaders of large organizations, including metro cities, to use Richard's word, to sort of transform their thinking to catch up with reality and what it means to lead really effectively in our emerging reality. And as I think you might know, David, did I tell you I'm writing a book at the moment? Working title is Becoming Good at Crises, a Provocation for Leaders. And it's aimed at leaders of large organizations. And by leaders, I don't only mean the CEO and chairman. I mean the people who find that they are in leadership positions, which is always a relatively small proportion. Because my co-author's take is that when you have a major crisis, if you have a sort of a small crisis, like there's a local flood near a factory of yours or in one part of the city you manage, you've usually got people who can respond to that, and there's frazzles everybody's brain for a few days, but you can cope. With a major crisis, and COVID is the most obvious one we all know about, it has to come back into the senior leaders' hands, and they are expected to lead. And the kind of things you have to do to be a really good leader in a major crisis are somewhat different from what you have to do during peacetime in order to be a good CEO or city manager, and so on. So we have this sort of thesis that we're developing in the book, that there are really two types of readiness in cities. The one, readiness for major crisis, the one is what all the stuff that you in the ISRM do, which is around getting your systems and people with the right skills and the right jobs to be scanning the horizon, to be doing the preparation for the obvious risks that your organization or city faces. But you never, so that's one thing that you have to do if you're diligent. But since you never know what crisis is next going to walk through your front door, we then spend most of the book focusing on what a leader needs to do to prepare him or herself for that moment when it lands on your desk and you have no clue whether this is going to be a 3-year job or a 3-week job, and whether it's going to knock over your entire city in the process. So, yeah, that's sort of the first little distinction I would make. And then I would just say one other thing, which is that one of the things we've learned from the Cape Town drought and from COVID is that some of the most valuable assets that you have to cope with a major crisis have to be in existence, preferably sort of properly up and running before the crisis arrives. You cannot, for example, build trust with your key stakeholders once the crisis arrives. If people don't basically trust their city leadership, they don't believe them because they think they're politicking when they talk to them, then they're not going to believe you when you say, hey guys, we've got a major crisis, we need your help. Come on, everybody, let's pull together. What's this pull together stuff? We've never pulled together with you. You're always pulling away. So, I mean, that's a very simple example, but trust is one of those invisible assets that if you've not invested in it properly as an organization and as a leadership, you will come undone in a major crisis, or you'll be way behind where you could be. Let's put it like that. So, yeah, I'll leave that there for now.
Thanks for that, Peter. We will definitely loop around. And really, there's two things, because at the end of the spectrum, there's leadership at one end, or not at the top, but and at the other end of the spectrum is the community. You have the leadership at the top, you have the community at the base. And those are the two critical anchoring points. And everything between that is sort of negotiable, but you've got to get those two pieces right. Otherwise, you're losing from the beginning. I'm going to learn, Peter, I recognize in everybody, who is a wise person? He who learns from everybody. I've learned from you. So, Douglas, what do you think? That's balanced out. That's what I'm going to ask you. What do you think? I'm not going to give long questions, nothing else. What do you think, Douglas? There you go.
Thank you, David. I'll build on what Peter was saying, because I couldn't agree more that the key point around leadership and that capacity being embedded across organizations, and basically the capacity and comfort with the different tools and processes and framework of thinking that leaders need to apply in a crisis situation, as well as in a BAU, what we would call a BAU situation, depending on your discipline and risk. And it's very similar across corporate entities where we work quite closely with, and where a lot of those frameworks and models are really deeply embedded or regulated. So there's a lot of maturity around what that looks like in corporate entities, but less so often in NGOs, and they're less so again in certain areas of government entities or local community organizations in particular, which is where the forefront in that community perspective, where the forefront of what that embedded resilience really needs to be when we're looking at that concept of overarching urban resilience. So that leadership point is really, really key. But what can often be overlooked, and I'd be interested, across the panel discussion on this for others' thoughts, the leadership isn't just at that top level and that top table for the strategic decisions which do need to be made in a crisis situation, but it's also across the different functions in an organization and the capacity and the capability that's embedded in those to be making the operational decisions that underpin those, and that stop a crisis recurring or repeating itself or becoming worse and further embedded into what the processes that are, the processes and systems that have been broken. What we often speak to is the fact that it isn't the complexity of the organization that really that defines how hard it is to manage a crisis. It's often the ability or the capability across the key functions in a business. It'll be the business units, and the ability that they have embedded in those to be managing the components of the crisis that they need to be managing day to day, and allow the strategic decision makers to sit above that and then look across and make the strategic decisions they need to do. So as a final point, I'll relate that to an area where I have specific experiences know well, is agricultural food systems, which is a really deeply critical aspect of that urban resilience conversation and the supply chains around those. When you look at across an agricultural food system, more often than not, at an individual farm level, there's a lot of comfort in terms of managing uncertainty and crises. The reality is, for most farmers, they have a 1 year, maybe a 5 year outlook if they're lucky. And so that comfort and that embedded resilience at a farm level is often really, really strong and powerful. It's the ability that the farmer can manage that. It's at the systemic level above those, and the components in the supply chain beyond the individual farmer and then to the plate, that often that resilience starts breaking down and where that capacity and capability starts lacking. So I'd really build on that as that leadership point, that it isn't really just that top table and that crucial awareness of the different components of a supply chain and where they come in. So, yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Doug. And I'm delighted to say we now have Sherrod James with us. Sherrod, welcome. Sherrod is the director of emergency response. I can't remember the exact name of the agency in I believe in Antigua in the Caribbean. Sherrod, great to have you. We've been talking about resilience and leadership, something which I'm sure you're highly experienced with. I imagine you've been listening to the conversation so far. Why don't you come on in? And then what we'll do is, I'm not going to ask any other questions. I'm just going to loop around and then we can sort of riff off on some of the themes that have already been raised. But Sherry, great to see you here. The microphone is
Thanks to be here. Excellent discussion. One of the things that I really appreciate is the multidimensional look at what it really means when we're talking about resilience and the whole aspect of leadership, because when you look at it, people usually have a one-dimensional precognition of what a leader is. They expect you to be this particular role at this particular time always, and that's not the case, because depending on the situation you're dealing with or the level at which you're interrelating with persons, sometimes you really have to make yourself into sometimes what we call a lasagna. Basically, at each level, you're adapting to the situation, and sometimes you really have to look at the human aspect of it. Sometimes you really have to look at, okay, what needs to be in terms of management, etc., and so on. Sometimes you need to take a streamlined look, and it really focuses a lot on being able to filter out what is noise, what is the fluff, and what is the strategic objective. What are you hoping to engage? Who are you hoping to engage? How do you hope to engage them? And what is the end result that you're looking to have? Because at the end of the day, it's really never about you as the leader, because you're as good as the people around you. You're as good as your team. You're as good as those that you're trying to help. So at the end of the day, when you look back at how am I achieving all of this and everything and so on, and it's not so much how am I achieving all this, how is the team that I'm working with? And I think that is where sometimes a lot of it gets lost in translation. So in looking at, when we're talking about leadership and looking about resiliency, what are you hoping to achieve? What is the end result? And then work your way back. So it's almost like you're taking a results-based management approach, sort of like project management and so on. What is the end result? What is this change in situation I'm trying to achieve? Therefore, what are the situations I need to address? Therefore, what are the outcomes that I'm looking to actually generate? And therefore, work myself back. See, where do I really need to actually focus a lot of my energies? Who do I need to be consulting with? Because a big part of it is dealing with pulling the right people, because a wise man knows what he doesn't know. And that's the point where you need to start pulling in those persons, those areas of those sectors that can actually bolster the whole process.
And of course, you need to do that when the whole world is falling down around you. You know, and then that, you know, your comms are down.
You're in emergency.
And the comms are down, and you don't have information, and the information you get is partial, and it is, you know, somebody's saying the bridge is open, somebody's saying the bridge is closed, and then the people you need to have aren't there, and the people who are there are not really the people you'd like to have there because they're not the right people. And then you're trying to sort of do things that have really transcends what you've been trained to do. Most people have not been trained to run a crisis. Certainly most politicians have not been trained to run a crisis. Sorry, Sherrod, please come in. And then,
I was saying I was agreeing with you there, because a lot of persons try and simplify the world, and it's really contextual, because in a crisis, a lot of times leaders want answers in black and white. Can I do this? What will I do this and everything? And you say, well, it's really a graduated response in terms of these are the pros and cons, and these are the options that you have. These are the best fit options and so on. So depending on what you have, your strategy is going to have to be multidimensional in implementation. And that's the point where a lot of people, they're uncomfortable because they really like simplified things, what to do, yes or no, etc. and so on. And life never really fits itself into boxes.